Hello, everyone. My name is Nora Burnett Abrams. I am the Mark G. Falcone Director of the Museum of Contemporary Art Denver. And we want to welcome and thank you so much for joining us for the third in our four-part series, NFTs, Putting the Fun in Non-Fungible Tokens, generously sponsored by Sotheby's.
Hi, Nora and everyone. I'm Amy Whitaker, a blockchain researcher in the arts and professor of visual arts administration at New York University.
Well, last week, we had the chance to speak with some artists who have created NFTs about their experiences. We talked about artists navigating different platforms and protocols and dealing with the environmental impact of blockchain, as well as using the technology in conceptually rigorous and critical ways. We were joined live by Kevin McCoy, who created the very first NFT, as well as artist Dred Scott. So you can find that episode as well as the first one on origin stories on MCA Denver's YouTube channel, if you missed it. And this week, Amy and I are ready to plow forward, continue the journey of exploring blockchain's impact on the art world by focusing this week on those who collect and acquire.
As we spoke about last week, our goal in this program overall is to talk about NFTs in a specific way, not to advocate for or against them, but to collectively try to figure them out and to try to be rigorous about that as generalists, meaning without a PhD in cryptography, though, of course, as always, a very warm welcome to anyone who has one.
We're all inclusive here. And so as we did mention just now, this is the third in our four-part series. And after today's episode on collectors and buying, episode 4, which will be next Wednesday, November 10th, that will focus on equity and future states, the kind of possibilities where we can imagine going forward from this. And if you want to hit that red subscribe button below this video so you don't miss the other episodes that we have both coming up, as well as other great content and live streamed events that we produce.
Great. And so over the past 2 weeks, we've been exploring these intersecting stories of NFTs. Certainly that's the technology story of blockchain itself, also the knowledge story of blockchain's origins and how we'll know what was true about the past without trusting a central administrator. And last week, we got to talk about these artist stories of how people are actually making NFTs. As we move toward week 4, we're going to get further into the democracy story of how blockchain may disrupt some power dynamics in the arts and create new structural opportunities for participation and equity. Equity in the sense of ownership, also fairness and inclusion. And this week, we want to pick up where we left off with the stories of artists making NFTs to focus on the ways in which people are collecting them. And to do that, we need to replace the intersecting stories with what we've been calling a set of kaleidoscopic lenses. These are all the viewfinders that a person might need to purchase and take care of an NFT. It's not a short list here, and these lenses are all connected, so you can make different colors by overlaying them. But for any artwork sale, collectors may be subject to AML, anti-money-laundering laws, which require buyers to be identified and their source of wealth specified. Because a lot of NFT sales happen online, some privacy regulations, such as GDPR, the European General Data Protection Regulation, and that's been in effect since May 2018, that may apply. And although crypto may seem placeless, these transactions are taxed, and purchases made in cryptocurrency may also have complex tax characteristics as an investment, meaning capital gains paid on cryptocurrency gains, and also as a transaction with sales tax or use tax, depending on the jurisdiction.
And on top of that, you would be acquiring a work of art. So for some, the question may even be, when talking about collecting and buying it, we may even want to just get down to kind of an even more foundational level about how do we parse an NFT as a work of art or as an art object, let's say, especially in such a new domain without necessarily it having documented histories of exhibition or even criticism, critical discussion of the work, the way you oftentimes do when acquiring a kind of, let's say, traditional work of art. So with such a new medium, this is clearly some uncharted territory for collectors. And there also, I would say, are so many different marketplaces. And you even have digital marketplaces as well as, again, more traditional marketplaces like Sotheby's and Christie's and Phillips, as well as even galleries that are creating new platforms specifically for NFT transactions. So in a sense, it might feel, and you would not be alone if you felt that everything is new and unproven and therefore potentially kind of unsettling. So how do you know exactly kind of what you are buying? These are some of the questions that we want to get at in the conversations we're having today.
Exactly. And this can be so exciting, right? As we're parsing these rapidly developing technologies and aesthetic regimes, if you will. But, if as Nora is saying, it may be kind of challenging to make sense artistically and aesthetically, it's also hard to know what you're buying technologically. Very few artworks exist on chain. More commonly, the NFT points to digital files somehow. So how does that work? Does the NFT point to a URL that could break? Is it a digital object that's saved in multiple copies or on the IPFS, the interplanetary file system? These are real questions that are kind of new for us with NFTs. So tonight we have these three goals: to talk about the regulatory environment of buying NFTs, anti-money laundering and other lenses; to talk about the transaction, how an object gets packaged, how an NFT gets conceptualized for sale; and to talk about the acquisition of artwork, what it means to collect an NFT, everything from how it's stored and cared for to what happens when you try to donate one to a museum. So to talk about the regulatory environment, we're thrilled to be joined by Sandy Lee, a longtime senior investment professional who teaches art market analysis at NYU and serves as the treasurer of the Joan Mitchell Foundation. Sandy will help us understand these regulatory frameworks around NFTs in a much more general investment due diligence context.
And as we start to talk about the transaction, we are going to be joined by Cassandra Hatton, who is a rare books and history of science expert by background. And she's also the architect of many NFT sales at Sotheby's. And then finally, to discuss the kind of ins and outs of collecting and selling, and in some cases donating to a museum NFTs, we are really excited to speak with two early NFT collectors as two different case studies in NFT collecting. So we'll speak first with Eduardo Barrio, who donated a CryptoPunk to the ICA Miami recently, as well as Pablo Rodriguez Fraye, a digital art collector who was not only an early buyer of Beeple's work, but also an early seller, and who is opening a cultural institution for digital art. So much to look forward to, but as we enjoy doing in these programs, we want to set the stage with a video that kind of introduces some of the key questions that we're going to be probing throughout the rest of the program. So we are going to set that stage by hearing from Beatriz, Ramos, and Judy, the co-founders of Dada, the collaborative drawing platform that celebrated its 4th birthday on Halloween. Happy birthday. Dada is really interested. I think that they're watching this live, so happy birthday and congratulations. Dada is very interesting for us because it started as an artist community that then only years later minted a curated collection of the drawings that people had made on the platform. The Creeps and Weirdos, which is what the collection is called, represents the way that works made in community and experimentation travel into markets. This certainly has happened in the, let's say, IRL art world, as well as in the digital. And Metacoven who was the buyer of Beeple's Everydays, that $69.3 million artwork that sold in March. They also acquired a full set of Creeps and Weirdos. So as we will see shortly, Dada thinks of these sales as part of their invisible economy project of creating universal basic income for artists. And this video, I think, really encapsulates, in a sense, that arc that we're trying to build that connects episode 2 on artists and making to today's episode's focus on collecting. So without further ado, and with great thanks to filmmaker and MCA Denver board member Adam Lipsius and his wonderful team, we introduce Judy and Bea. Thank you.
My name is Judy, ma'am. I am a writer. I'm originally from Mexico City.
I went to school for art and illustration, started working on editorial illustrations for the New York Times.
I used to work as a creative director in advertising for many years, which is where I met Bea.
My first experience in advertising was with Judy's agency and Judy's team.
Bea talked to me about Dada, and we decided to kind of do it together. When we started Dada, and Bea said, we need to give artists something to do. We need to give them the tools to express themselves. And we provided them with a very simple tool, and people drew, and other people responded.
When we started the community, it was important to me that it was decentralized, a community that will capture the value that they were creating, that it was completely open.
And we found, for instance, that people felt actually more comfortable drawing with strangers from all over the world than drawing with people that they knew. But it's not only an open canvas, but it's a conversation. The Creeps and Weirdos is our first collection. It's the first NFTs that we launched. At the time, they weren't even called NFTs, so we used to call them rare art or blockchain art or crypto art. Drawings of the Creeps and Weirdos were actually made by people in Dada in different conversations. The Creeps and Weirdos were a curated collection. We actually took these creepy and weird characters that we found in different conversations. We wanted to have kind of like a specific meaningful date, so to speak, to launch the project, and so we chose Halloween of 2017.
We sold 800 in 2017. That's a huge traction because it's probably all there was back then.
We all can do our own NFTs. They convert digital content into an asset that becomes more concrete. The token that is attached to it concretizes it in the sense that I can buy one. Art was one of the first use cases of NFTs. It's kind of interesting because it's immutable. So you can't change an NFT. You cannot at all alter it. There was all of a sudden this boom in NFT collecting that came out kind of like almost out of the blue. In March of this year, something we call the Ape Storm happened. Bea called me one Sunday morning and said to me, I think we're being hacked. People were buying directly from our 2017 contract that was not public. They used Time Machine and they used stuff like that to get into like old links, and they were actually buying directly from the contract, from contract to contract. Like 3 hours, we made like $350,000. With the relaunch, what we hope to achieve is that we are going to move into the invisible economy, which is not market driven. It's a whole different dynamic.
We understand that a lot of these people actually, they're not wealthy people. They're just trying to make money. Artists as a group are transferring 90% of their source of wealth to collectors as a group. There are going to be a few artists who are going to be making millions, while most of the artists are not going to be making anything. Everything is market terms, except that all the money, 100% of it, goes straight to the invisible economy to be distributed as basic income for our community.
Everything is going to be distributed to the community more equally. Has no one said, oh, but I'm more important, or I sell more, or I am more recognized? There has been no such thing. Dada is a platform where there's no marketplace whatsoever here. You cannot buy, you cannot sell. It's just a place to do drawings.
So what we're doing is building the space now, designing that space for generosity to emerge, for collaboration to emerge, for creativity to emerge.
The reason why Dada is a place where people come to make art, they don't come to sell art, because people would start catering to what people want to buy and not drawing what they want. Having an economy for artists where artists can actually concentrate on making art and not having to market it. So I think NFTs are here to stay, and the people who are investigating them, making them, are going to continue doing it. And I just think the world needs to catch up, really.
It's so exciting to see Dada and to hear from Judy and Bea. We'll drop a link in the chat to the Creeps and Weirdos sale if anyone is curious to learn more. And really good luck to Bea and Judy and the Dada team on some projects they're launching today and tomorrow as part of NFT NYC. And just to say, I was saying to Nora earlier that they were celebrating their 4th anniversary, but I realized it's actually the 4th anniversary of the Creeps and Weirdos. And Dada itself was founded in 2014, which is really extraordinary. I think there's something really beautiful and generous about a drawing community. And in a way, what we're talking about now are the kind of protections and supports of that community, the way that we can think seriously about what could go wrong and what needs to be secured in order to protect that space. So what we want to talk about tonight is the kind of practical and regulatory context in which one collects NFTs. What do you do with them? What's the due diligence on buying one? I certainly have beginner's mind on some of these topics. Maybe we all do. There are 3 different layers here, right? The first is the true requirements, as in the points of law, and how existing regulatory frameworks apply, anti-money laundering, tax, and so on. The second is what comes up that's particular to an NFT sale. It's not just here's the Monet painting and it comes with a frame, but how is the work put together? How do we know the security of it? And finally, what does it mean artistically to collect an NFT? So I'll do the honors of introducing our first speaker here to talk with us about this regulatory environment. We're so excited to be talking with Sandy Lee. Sandy is a managing director of a private investment firm, and she has for a long time advised institutions and private investors on long-term alternative asset management and fintech opportunities. I was fortunate to be her colleague many years ago and also to co-teach with her now. So a very warm welcome to Sandy Lee.
Hi, Sandy. Welcome.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me.
We're so happy you're here. And I know that you and Amy get to spend a lot of time together co-teaching, but I don't know if you've ever been introduced like that at Amy's class. So we're trying to razzle dazzle you a little.
This will be the new practice. So thank you for that.
100%.
So Sandy, you have obviously incredible and rich expertise here because not only do you advise clients in general about financial investing, but you also a number of boards of trustee roles that you serve on, and you co-teach with Amy. So you have all these different kind of layers of expertise. And so we're going to tap into that to engage you around some of the kind of regulatory frameworks, as Amy mentioned in your introduction, that are newer to the arts, but not necessarily new to finance. So maybe you can kind of just help us get anchored and oriented here. Let's start with, what is AML and how does this apply to the acquisition of, or the buying of, the purchasing of NFTs?
Yep. So first off, so thrilled to be here. I think what is really interesting about this space right now is that I come at it from a professional financial investing perspective. And then I also spend time in the art world. Often I think that they're parallel verticals. And so I think NFTs right now in particular sort of provide those ladder rungs to connect these sort of disparate communities. And socially, I think we all benefit from that. So I'm really excited about that and the conversations that are coming out of that. Anti-money laundering is, I think, a good example of where industries are converging, and where industries have to think about the same issue, and regulators have to think about how do we not regulate one specific item, but how do we create a framework that applies to all assets, whether we consider them financial assets or property. Cryptocurrency, digital currency right now is in that netherworld, as I know you guys talked about. So people are trying to figure this out as we build, which is really exciting. AML is anti-money-laundering. It's sort of the big thing that I would ask us to think about in terms of regulation. Mm-hmm. And so it really is exactly what it sounds like. The fear in financial markets is that dirty money might enter the system. So there are all these rules in place to prevent the layering of dirty money, the placement and layering and cycling of money into clean money. So often it's processes that are regulated by governments, but that are applied by the banks, by the financial institutions around KYC is something you'll hear, know your customer. Mm-hmm. Do you know who the end customer is for a certain transaction? Do you know who the end customer is on an account? How do you figure this out? How do you before you finalize a transaction, get that information? This is something that we're seeing in the traditional art world that's happening due to governmental regulation. And it's not that it hasn't been there, but the level at which they're asking for information is moving closer towards what they're asking for in financial transactions. And this is a different way of working for the art world. Often it's lack of transparency, i.e. keeping your buyers and sellers close, keeping your ledger close, is how you make money in this space. And so you see the traditional art market heading towards the need for more transparency. And then on the NFT side, I think there's a debate. There's a spectrum in terms of NFTs as collectibles, NFTs as art. We could spend many hours on that.
Indeed.
But where we are regulatorily speaking is right now, without offering tax advice, the IRS is not formally opined on NFTs, but there is a question of how much information do we need to transact? How much information will someone ask for in the future about this? And depending on what platform you're transacting on, what will they ask for now or in the future? And I think it's interesting because you certainly have like independent NFT platforms, but you also have news like Coinbase, where you can buy and sell a digital currency, Coinbase opening up their own NFT platform. And so there is, there's the question of, does it look like a duck? Does it walk like a duck? Where does it fit in? So people are figuring this out, and it's a fascinating time.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting to hear you talk about it, because on the one hand, these general regulatory frameworks are coming into the traditional art market, and on the other hand, the NFTs are sometimes bought anonymously, or people might be tempted to. So just before we expand to include one more person in our conversation, I just want to ask you a kind of two-part question, which is, if a lot of these works that are sold, that are digital works, are sold on online platforms, is there GDPR that comes into place? And maybe if you were thinking about it from the point of view of having a private client who is looking at NFTs, is there anything, whether it's GDPR or tax, anything else that you'd advise them to really keep an eye out for? And I know you're not offering investment advice, but just in a general kind of just conversation among colleagues sort of a way.
Without offering investment or tax advice, I'd say tax is something that is a huge question right now, both on digital currency and on NFTs. Currently, they're treated as property, NFTs in particular as collectibles. And there is a question of when one should be paying taxes on a transaction. Is it when you pay for your NFT with Ethereum, and then you have to pay the capital gains on how much your Ethereum sort of went up in value? And then when you sell your NFT, do you pay gains on that as well? How do you keep all the records? I think that is something that people are formulating larger opinions on. So I'd say keep your records and keep that in mind if for some reason you are thinking about NFTs as an investment. I'm not advocating for that, but I recognize that some people do think of it that way. GDPR, I think privacy is a really big thing, in that AML requires a certain level of disclosure. So a certain move around privacy trends for the purpose of financial regulation, so for the safety of the whole. And so I think there is a push and pull between how much do we want to be anonymous, how much do we subscribe to the ethos of decentralized currency and push for anonymity in this, or how much does this fold into traditional finance or traditional art, wherever we think it belongs?
And I have to say, from the museum, we are a non-collecting museum, so I can ask this just as an intellectual exercise, but just the due diligence that is required when a museum does receive a work of art, which is something we will pick up later with Eduardo, but knowing the provenance, if you will, of a work is fundamental to the acquisition process. And so the import of both protecting one's privacy and yet also knowing every step on the journey from when the work was conceived to when it might enter your collection is so vital. So these questions for institutions are so interesting and fascinating to explore. Okay, we want to continue to kind of think through these issues with an auction house specialist as well, who is working on NFT sales. So we are so fortunate to be joined now by Cassandra Hatton from Sotheby's. Cassandra has, as we mentioned at the beginning, worked on a number of Sotheby's NFT sales as vice president and global head of department, as well, and senior specialist, for science and popular culture. And she is based in New York. So Cassandra, thank you for joining us. Hi, Cassandra. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're thrilled you're here. And we would love if you could kind of kick things off for us by speaking a little bit about your background in rare books and history of science, and how how to compare, if you may, selling an NFT versus selling a Nobel medal, and how those experiences differ or are the same.
Yeah, happy to go into that. I started my career out 18 years ago as a rare books and manuscripts dealer, focusing on the history of science. I also sold scientific instruments, but really focused on 16th and 17th century science. And then as my career progressed, I started to integrate more 20th century material, history of computing, history of tech, space exploration, Apple I's, Enigma machines, you name it. I just started really, going for it. And then I started working in the auction world. And some of the things that you were saying, Sandy, are really interesting. AML and KYC have always been super important since I've joined the auction world. And I think back on what I did when I was a dealer. One of the big services I would provide to my clients was bidding at auction for them to shield their identity. I take a percentage. I did my due diligence and made sure that I knew who they were and I knew where their money was coming from, but the auction house did not get to know who they were. And there's been a big shift to where that is a very difficult thing to do now. If an advisor or a dealer is bidding on behalf of a client, we need to know who the ultimate, the beneficial owner is going to be, who is really going to own that painting or that other object. So that's a really interesting shift that we're seeing happen. And to answer your question, Nora, about what's the difference between selling an NFT and a Nobel Prize medal, of which I've sold several now. I sold the source code for the World Wide Web as an NFT in July, which was amazing. A lot of work. That was really the first NFT I'd ever sold, and had to learn what an NFT was while I was figuring out the sale. And the way I looked at it is it really wasn't any different than a manuscript. It was a digital asset that could not be sold otherwise. How else would you sell the source code for the World Wide Web? Would you dig up the original hard drive it was saved on? How could you prove which hard drive was original? You really can't. You have to just declare. I mean, what we sold were the original time-stamped and dated files from Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who wrote the code. But really, like, who's to say that the one that we sold was the only one or the original one? It's almost impossible to say that, right? So you have to declare that there is one true original and mark that with the NFT. So that's really, I found that really exciting. And as I was speaking to clients of mine who are major scientific manuscript collectors, this is how I pitch it: is this is a born digital manuscript. Is this manuscript worth less money because the author wrote it, on their computer versus on paper and pen? And I think we've seen now it's the second most expensive scientific artifact to have ever sold after the Da Vinci Codex. So I think our answer is no, it's not worth less money.
It's so interesting because I think you're really getting into the way that you design the kind of quote unquote package around the sale. And I will drop a link in the chat. Cassandra mentioned the World Wide Web source code sale. We'll drop a link in if anyone wants to check it out, because I think it's really interesting intellectually and creatively to define what the work is, and especially for you coming from the side of representing buyers to then organizing the sale. I'm wondering if I can ask you to kind of, if there's anything else, you gave us such an interesting sense of the package, if there's anything you want to add there. And then also, as you're kind of thinking in tandem with what Sandy introduced, if there are things that come up for you now dealing with buyers, like especially, with DAOs and these kind of anonymity norms, if there's anything you want to add on that.
I think that the DAO is really the most interesting thing. We're always going to see tax issues, and people, from where I'm sitting, people want to tell me their tax woes, and I just, I can't stop talking. I don't hear it. I can't give you tax advice.
Sandy can relate. Yes. Cassandra, can I just ask real quick, would you mind, just in case there are members of our audience who don't know what a DAO is, do you mind just briefly clarifying that?
A DAO is, I don't remember what the acronym stands for.
Decentralized Autonomous Organization.
Yes. It's a group of people who work together to buy a single item. So they pool their funds together, and then the group owns the item collectively. What's really challenging for us in the auction business is we have to know who all of the members of this group are. I mean, it's not new for collectives to buy things. If you're an LLC, the LLC can buy something. That's not, like, you can buy and sell, and that's fine. But in the case of the LLC, we know the identity of every member. We get a copy of the Articles of Incorporation. We know who the beneficial owners are. With DAOs, that's not always the case. And kind of the function of DAOs is for everybody to kind of be anonymous and decentralized. So there's trying to create commensurability between that world and the auction world. It's possible. We just need to find, what fields to map to what fields.
That's so well said. Yeah.
But I think that's the biggest thing. And I've met so many amazing people that are part of DAOs that are huge NFT collectors, but are also really interested in, I sell dinosaurs. They want to buy dinosaurs. They want to buy spacesuits. They want to buy moon rocks. They want to buy these kinds of things. And the conversations are, well, let me go talk to the rest of the DAO. I'm like, oh, okay. What up, LLC? I can help you.
Aren't they all going to want to buy dinosaurs or astronaut suits? It seems like, you almost might not even need to go check, but obviously you do. Well, kind of just thinking about that sort of due diligence question, and I think the DAO is such an interesting wrinkle there. I'm just wondering, Sandy, is there anything that you're hearing Cassandra say that kind of hits you through a general due diligence lens?
It's the same beneficial owner question that comes up. And so I so respect where people are coming from in terms of the anonymity and the desire for anonymity and the core sort of underlying decentralized premise of blockchain and of distributed ledgers and of, so I have so much respect for that. And it's this feeling of, are we making them step out into a world? They've created a world, right? Like they've created the world, a world that is hopefully better in some ways, more fluid in some ways, has some advantages. Are we asking them to step back into the traditional world for good reason? But what do they give up for that, and how do they quantify that? I think that's a piece of the diligence of, is it worthwhile? Because this intangible value is something that you have to account for in your transaction before you make the transaction.
I also think that in relation to what we saw from Judy and Bea in terms of on the creative side, right? Building the thing that will eventually sell from a community of a decentralized community of contributors and creators on the one hand. So the kind of parallel yet not parallel, like we don't, I don't want to say demand, but it is not required to know the identity of all the individuals who have participated in Creeps and Weirdos. It may be available, but that's not a fundamental aspect of the sale. Yet to buy it, to your points, very much is.
Yeah. Kind of, what's the point of authenticity? Is it the creation of the scientific document or the receiving of the Nobel medal, or is it the collective, as you're kind of saying, Nora, as well? I mean, just really, really interesting. Well, we've figured it all out. So.
I will say I really respect that as we think about creating the metaverse, that there aren't just commercial participants in it. I love that there are creators thinking about frameworks within this larger construct. It's really just, I'm so thrilled that these questions are being asked as things are being built. When structures are wrapped.
And in the history of science context too, where we have this frame of reference that's this history of knowledge and scientific achievement. I think it's a really important conversation to stitch the dots across. And we're so grateful to both of you for helping us do that.
Indeed. Thank you so much. This conversation could go on forever. We're grateful for your sharing your lenses. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. Great to see you both.
To see you too.
Cassandra knows so much about the history of sales of Nobel medals. Every time I talk to her, I want to know more.
I think we've come up with our next program series.
So now we'll go from talking about regulatory infrastructure and Nobel medals to talking finally about the Beeple work that really signposted the NFT phenomenon. I think halfway through episode 3 is where we really felt this needed to come in, this work that was auctioned for $69.346 million. So it's kind of interesting. In economics or finance, auctions are really viewed as a neutral price clearing mechanism. In fact, in the last couple of years, people have won the kind of medal Cassandra can help you sell for this exact research. But in the case of Beeple's Everydays, there's a kind of interesting wrinkle in the auction, which is that the buyer, Metakovan, the moniker for Vignesh Sundaresan, he turned around and he put that Beeple work into a fund, MetaPurse, that is intended to be offered to the public to be able to buy shares. So this idea of democratizing art through an economic means of ownership. But what's curious is that the auction price had this peculiar function. It created the statement of the work's value, right? So essentially, Metakovan marked to market a work that he would sell by buying it. The fact that he bought it created the public auction price that is then understood to be representative of the value of the work.
Some people's heads might be exploding, so we might want to pause for a moment, because yes, this is, the event that kind of, I think, punctured by which NFTs really punctured popular culture and mindshare. the stunning value of $69.3 million, I think just can't be ignored. And to your the first point you made, Amy, is so pertinent, just in that, a marketplace is supposed to just make clear what the value of an object or an asset or a token or what have you might be, right? Because you have the supply, and then how many people want it, and what is the demand for it, and that establishes the value. And I'm clearly simplifying and glossing over like millions and millions of pages of research. But the point is that I think that's in part why it was even more stunning to see the sale price, because this is what the marketplace had made it. And yet then your next point of kind of turning it over to be a fund that would make shares available for anyone to buy into, kind of seems to upend the kind of economic model that launched it. Am I even reframing that correctly?
No, exactly. You're making me think of Aswath Damodaran is a colleague of David Yermak's at NYU. He teaches valuation, and in his workshop, which I sat in on once, he actually shows an image of it's the Francis Bacon, Lucian Freud triptych that sold for $142 million. And he shows it in spreadsheet artwork. And he uses it to make the point that you should not talk about valuing something when you're really pricing it.
Oh,
and
so true.
For
That's
art, we can't value it in a financial sense. It doesn't usually have cash flows. We of course value it in a connoisseurship sense through appraisal and other methods. Specialists like Cassandra are experts in doing that. But in this case, it's really a price, and it's a price determined at auction, by a person who's, maybe you could analyze it as he has a private value interest in it because he can sell the work. There are ways we could frame it within the body of finance, but I think it's really notable and underscores the performative nature of all art auctions, really. But I think the reason we wanted to mention it, and certainly kind of mention our relationship to the price, but we wanted to mention it because another aspect of the work is that it's a study of labor. Because Mike Winkleman, who goes by Beeple, made an artwork every day since 2007. So this work represents, whatever people have said to being critical of the arguably racist, sexist, or homophobic content of individual small artworks within it. This represents a constancy of sustained artistic practice. Mm-hmm. But Nora and I have really aimed to look at NFTs in a longer history of art with LeWitt and others. And this idea of time and labor is one part of the work, is not new. And I just wanted to mention two different works. The first is that from 1980 to 1981, the artist Taeching Sei made One Year Performance, or what's often referred to as a time clock piece, in which the artist punched in and out of a time clock in his studio from April 11th of one year to the same day the next. So 366 time cards, but 365 days, 24-hour days. The work is documented in a few different ways, including a film that links together all the still photos that he made every time he punched the clock. And he also asked a man named David Milne, who was then the executive director of the Foundation of the Community of Artists, to sign his time card. So it's sort of interesting pre-digital distributed ledger, kind of how one creates audit functions. But compared to people making one work every day, he goes by Sam. Taeching Sei, he kept records every time he failed to punch the clock that year, and that's 8,760 hours. And he missed 134, which is 1.54%. On a 24-hour clock, he only missed 93 times for sleeping. So I think this is really, quite extraordinary as a lineage of works, and we could name many others, but just to name one that's more contemporaneous to Beeple's everydays, the artist Cole Wilson undertook what she called the National Debt Project. So starting in August of 2009, She started sending any coins she found, loose change, on the ground to the U.S. Treasury Department, specifically to the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, which used to be called the Bureau of the Public Debt, copying the White House to help defray the national deficit, which she was worried about in the aftermath of 2008. She would send the change with a letter via registered mail, and she still does this. To date, she has sent $519.48 at a cost of $18,932.98. We'll drop a link in the chat where you can see the way that Cole Wilson documents the work. But I think these projects really take us back to the fundamental questions of how NFTs relate to longstanding artistic practices of conceptual or performance-based art.
Absolutely, Amy. The durational aspect being one of many kind of threads that kind of link up across the decades. And I think the idea of works that originate kind of conceptually, but then somehow come to function in markets differently, it returns us again to LeWitt. And we kind of posed this question again to Chris Bacchio, the director of research for the LeWitt Wall Drawings Catalog Raisonné, which for those who are really paying attention, Chris joined us in the first episode. So we return to Chris because we really want to anchor ourselves around the importance of the certificate of authenticity, that's where we see kind of the origin really of this connection to conceptual art of the 60s and NFTs, and how that kind of anticipates where we are with NFTs, how they relate to NFTs. So we'll return to Chris for a moment.
LeWitt's certificates are really not replaceable. He died in 2007, and at the time at which he died, there were a fixed number of certificates, one for each wall drawing. So if you lose it, that wall drawing really leaves the market. There was actually a gallery in Chicago that had a wall drawing on consignment and had the certificate for the wall drawing as well as the diagram. They're essentially 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, typewritten and signed by the artist. So they're kind of easy to lose, and it was misplaced. And the gallery had to essentially pay the person who had consigned it because they had lost it, the same way as if you had lost, a physical painting or an object, which obviously is a lot harder to do. In that case, the work is no longer saleable. The certificate has to accompany ownership. It really establishes the chain of ownership. And, in those cases, it's possible for the work to still be installed. And in cases where the works are donated, the LeWitt estate can be willing to issue what is called a statement of authenticity, which is not a certificate or a replacement for it. It merely states that the work is real, and the person who donates it with the museum knows that this is a genuine LeWitt. But if the certificate is ever located, then it must be donated to the museum like any other physical object. Luckily, the gallery did end up locating the certificate, so that work is still sort of marketable, luckily. I think the certificates, kind of much like NFTs, are just a way of making a new form of art able to be saleable. And it's really a way of tracking the ownership of essentially an idea. So for LeWitt, there's this really interesting example because many of the wall drawings are so simple and they're based on geometry. It's very easy to recreate a LeWitt. And although they're not official LeWitt wall drawings, if you were to do it on your own wall without permission, LeWitt himself said that he would have considered it an homage, and he was very happy that those existed. So while we don't include them in the catalog raisonné, there are many instances where you see them out in the world, and he liked them. So that part's very nice. And you can draw a parallel with NFTs in that regard, because you might own the NFT for, say, something like Nyan Cat, where the NFT of that was sold at a certain point, but it's still really out in the world. And so you might own the original, but that doesn't stop anyone else from enjoying it. And I think that's something that LeWitt himself would have felt very positively about.
It's wonderful. And I'm so glad that they found that gallery found that certificate, because that sounded like quite a hot mess. Okay, so from that kind of incredible and concise clarification around certificates of authenticity and how vital they are as kind of to legitimize for a collector that they actually own the work that they think that they own. It is a great kind of segue, if you will, to the two collector case studies that we want to kick off now. So we can kind of understand a little bit more about the ins and outs of collecting, of selling, and in the first case, even donating an NFT. So we are fortunate to speak with Eduardo Barrio. Eduardo is a family office CEO who holds a PhD in finance and serves as a trustee of ICA Miami. He currently focuses on tokenomics, which is the economics of crypto tokens, and supply chain and digital asset management issues for art. So he was an early investor in crypto and NFTs as part of a kind of larger collecting practice. And we've asked him to join us tonight to share more about his introduction to art and his experience as one of the first people to try and donate an NFT to an art museum. So welcome, Eduardo. Hello, Eduardo.
Hello, Laura.
Hi.
Hi,
Hey, Laura,
Eduardo.
how are you?
I'm great. We can't see you, but we can hear you. So if you're able to, if there's a way to turn on video, that would be awesome. But as a disembodied voice speaking the voice of NFT, we are thrilled to have you here. Eduardo, we'd love to just begin the conversation if we could by just asking you about how you began collecting art and what were your kind of initial areas of interest, and were they digital art or something else?
Well, thank you. Sorry about the video.
No.
Well, initially, I became an art collector at a very young age. I was 12 years old when I was gifted my first painting by an uncle of mine. And he told me one day, may this be the beginning of your big collection. I don't know what happened to that painting. No pressure. But I guess I always, I grew up always around a lot of culture in my family. As creators of culture and media, I was always stimulated by, whether it was the cultural expression, beauty, but also intellectual reading, philosophy, particularly Walter Emerson drove a lot of interest in me, the way that he described nature as God's artistic creation. And that always fascinated me. And I believe that everyone, in a way, is always correcting art. If you look at the narrative of society, we are consuming food, we're buying clothes, we're showing the clothes, we're, same with the jewelry. Now you do it through social media as well, but we're always like expressing our taste and our likenesses by the way you enter in someone's home, what they have displayed there, the cars they drive, anything from the content we consume and show. So that's kind of where ultimately I think when you get into the collecting side of it, the education part is so enriching. And so even though it's subjective, it becomes so subjective to the person that they want to share it the same way that an artist creates and wants to share what they've made. And fundamentally, that's what drives my passion.
I love that. I mean, in a way, you're describing how visual we are as people while also reading to us without a visual, which is sort of mysterious and sort of like childhood story time. No, I love it. So if there's more of that you wanted to add, but I wanted to jump in on a story that you're uniquely able to tell us. I mean, I don't know of anyone else in the world who's had the situation, which is that as a trustee of the Institute of Contemporary Art in Miami, you donated CryptoPunk 5293. And this is sort of extraordinary. And maybe you can kind of help us understand a little more your relationship to art and cultural institutions by sharing that story.
Yes, I've been around cultural institutions all my life through my family. But in particularly, I've always been fascinated with technology. It's been a while that I've been obsessed with decentralized economies and technologies. I think we just started. There's future aspects that we haven't thought about, like biochemistry, medicine, the regulation of the electromagnetic spectrum through mesh networks, the possibilities of having like right now they're talking about environmental factors, but eventually that's going to be, those lines of limitation will be gone, the same as storage and bandwidth.
Yeah.
So when I really understood what NFTs were, not just a form of like a JPEG or a digital art form, I really was fascinated with the possibilities of the collaborative environments where many creators could get involved and have their consumers be creating with them economies of scale with their tokens. For me, that was kind of like, okay, this is like the future, where there's different universes, different coins, there's different interactions, and that is what for me was like, okay, I want to learn all about it. I want to dive in. So I bought the first CryptoPunks early in the year, and there was this announcement of the auction, and that's what kind of like gave me the security that I knew that there was going to be, there's obviously institutional fundamental value through that. But after the auction hit the double high estimate, the community was disappointed, and for the art world, it was a surprise and it was a huge success. But for the crypto world and the actual CryptoPunk community, it dropped. And I tried to figure out what to do, and then I called Alex Gartenfeld, and being so visionary and supportive, he said, I love the idea. Let's get this done. How do we do this? So I called Carlin Taylor. I'm like, let's figure it out. Could you like escrow it until we figure out the appraisal with you and all that? And so we kind of like, once we was secured in that way, we're like, okay, now we can make the announcement while we figure out how to get the insurance and everything that is required. Which even the IRS at that time, like no one's really knowing what's happening. It's a first. So I think that created it was something that created education on both sides, and it gave the confidence for like, for one, the existing art world to understand that there's value in this, not just in the artistic expression format or the economy, but also in the technology, like we were discussing with the provenance, the authenticity, the chain of title. Like it brings so much more of what we needed in the regulatory side, and also on the other side, on the crypto world, we got so many new collectors that some of them came initially when they were collecting shoes and other forms of toys that were collectibles early in their lives, but now they jump into the NFT world because it's cool, it's innovating, and through that they get educated into the institution side, starting with the auction houses, the museums, the public art, and then after that to actually looking at high level collecting of all kinds of art. So all these new buyers, all these new economies are going to drive our transactions and our volatility and our economies into a new scale, which is why I'm kind of like all for it, and I think that everyone should be more involved with nonprofits, definitely.
Amen.
Well done.
Thank you.
We didn't even plan that. Florida, thank you.
Well, yeah, that's what the public owns, and we need to support. And there's a lot to be done. There's we can mint stuff with the museums, and all of that. It's like it perpetuates.
Well, Eduardo, we hope you can tune in next week when Amy and I bring in some additional colleagues to talk about what the future of this really is. We all, I think, are in full agreement that we are at the very beginning of something, that it is in its infancy, and the directions it can go are almost infinite. And so it's really exciting to talk through what they might be.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
They would love to join. Thank you. Thank you, Laura.
It's great to talk with you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Eduardo.
Likewise.
And so now we are going to continue on in our conversations with collectors by bringing on another early NFT collector, Pablo Rodriguez Fraye. Pablo studied mathematics and economics and has a deep background in finance and investment management. He is an art collector, both in a kind of traditional sense. You can see the Elizabeth Peyton painting that he and his wife purchased recently of a portrait of David Bowie, as well as a collector of NFTs. So he he really has, as one of the kind of earliest collectors of NFTs, he has quite a distinguished and comprehensive collection of them, and was early enough in his collecting that he not only acquired a Beeple, but he also sold a work by Beeple. And he's here to share with us that experience, as well as share a little bit more about his current area of focus in terms of collecting NFTs and digital art rigorously and seriously, and starting an organization called ARIST, excuse me if I bungled that, a cultural institution for digital art. So Pablo, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Hello.
Hi, Pablo. How are you?
Very good. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely.
We're so glad to be in conversation with you. And Pablo, Nora was mentioning that in the midst of your more comprehensive digital art collecting, you were a very early acquirer of Beeple's work and then sold a piece. And I was really struck when we were talking before about how you met Mike Winkelmann, knew the artist, talked with him in the process of purchasing the work, and then consulted with him when you were deciding to sell it. And I wondered if you'd be able to share that story with us.
Well, certainly, it would be a pleasure. The reality is that one of the fascinating things that we can do while collecting NFTs is that the reality is that the majority of artists who are still here with us are very engaging. It's very community driven. And there's always that conversation happening with the artist generally that you collect. So it's very, very engaging for the collector. But in Mike's case, it was a peculiar situation. Mike, or Beeple, before he came into the space and became a sensation here, he was already widely regarded one of the best digital artists globally. He had a very, very long career. As you said, he had been spending the last 5,000 days of his life every day releasing illustrations, and he was widely recognized. Now, before he came into the space, he was very smart also, and he started speaking with all the participants of the ecosystem that were very active, and thankfully I was able to speak with him. And during that process, I realized that this individual had every single virtue that makes a good person, a good man, in his case, a good artist, and that he was going to have all the drive and all the ingredients to really be a symbol that you're in the space. You could see by the dedication, by just the general talent, by the genius of his conversations, by the way he interacts with each other, and by how other people were talking about him. Where just like literally everybody just has positive things to say. Now, outside of that, we just connected personally, very strongly. Somebody that I respect and I like a lot, and I realized again that their work was very powerful, and one of the few people in the world that could really comment through their work on many things that happen in society while achieving a very high level of execution. So it was very clear to me during those conversations that it was certainly an artist that was gonna, again, be the leader and the symbol of a movement. And it was a very easy decision for me to support on his first release and actually come along and collect his first two pieces ever released. Now, of course, given that this ecosystem is so engaging, I maintain a conversation with Mike over the course of the next few weeks, and when I started receiving some conversations and some offers for one of the works, I was very happy, of course, to go speak to him, because I personally, and I don't want to get that much into what I do myself with my collection, but I'm not doing this out of a monetary thing. This is more of a legacy, a patronage play for me. Or for us, for my wife and I, but the reality is that it was fundamentally a moment that changed the NFT ecosystem. It was before the big sale in Christie's. It was really what went out and actually got the attention from a lot of individuals outside. And I thought it was a great moment to validate all the wonderful things that were happening in the ecosystem. And together with Mike, I of course asked him before whether he was okay with that, and that was fascinating. He was okay with that. Yeah.
So Pablo, could you share with us kind of what it means to you, or not even just what it means, but what inspired you to start the cultural institution for digital art that you and your wife are launching?
Okay, well, this is okay. So my wife and I, because of our backgrounds, because of our families, have always been surrounded by art, by culture. I'm always very involved in the ecosystem. Now, we were never traditional collectors in that sense, but we've always been around, forward-thinking architecture and just beautiful art around. Now, given that my background relies on investing in the blockchain space, when I saw the technology arise, that was merging those two passions, or those two ways of how we live our life, it was a very simple and obvious decision. I realized very early the implications that this could have over the long term, and how innovative and potentially changing for the general art market this could be. And again, I just thought that now, as we move into the digital realm with absolutely everything that we do, it just makes sense that we also interact and engage with art in a digital form in a way that is secure and in a way that can be valued. So for me, it was very clear. So that situation was very easy to start collecting in that regard. And then we created Aris because a lot of positive things are happening in the ecosystem, and I think it's transforming not only many people's life but the whole industry as a whole. But we need to be conscious that there's still some problems or some issues that do not allow these to develop as we wish. And two of them, I won't dive too much into them, but one of them right now, it's we have a small problem with user experience, where if you don't have a PhD in blockchain, you simply cannot operate. It's a little bit too difficult to search for, it's too expensive, it's technical, and it's a little bit risky. So as an industry, we really need to evolve to put the right infrastructure for people to be able to participate in the same way that they're accustomed in e-commerce. Now, on the other side, and again, taking all the innovations happening, on the other side, we're having a slight problem of curation or quality control, where the majority of platforms are allowing some creators to go into the NFT space and release some of their works. But the reality is that there's very little support outside of that. So only the technical ability to raise but no PR, no structure, no seeing how that fits within the career of an artist, just the ability to release some work. So we've been trying with Aris to set up an institution, a cultural institution that is a lot more than just a marketplace. The marketplace is a component. It's a very advanced component where things are priced in US dollars, ability to pay with credit card, debit card, ACH, wire, absolutely everything that you need. Automatic carbon credit purchasing with every transaction to offset the minimal offsets that we do. But the reality is that to support all of that, we have included a very, very strong cultural team led by Jimena Caminos, the ex-chair of Faena. And the reality is that we want to support the artist in creating those digital creations that can live also in physical domains and that can bridge with the traditional world.
No, I mean, it's your point about having a more curated space, have it a little more edited, if I could say that. Is that accurate? That's both a marketplace and also a presenting space, a gallery space, to just, as you've made clear, the importance of kind of information and education and a place to engage with works that is, kind of richly supported and dimensional. So it's not just an array of digital images, if you will. And I don't mean to be aloof when I say that, but just to kind of honor the work, the creative work that has been put into the development of these NFTs, to allow us to take them as seriously isn't the wrong word, but like to engage with them critically as works of art.
Exactly. And then again, we believe that there should be a proper way, a proper onboarding for anybody that wants to participate in this. And again, you were mentioning before about certificate of authenticity. We think that all of this is very important to make sure that the work lives here, not for the foreseeable future, but really for 2,000, 3,000, 10,000, a million years moving forward, with the same type of provenance and all the certificates that we have in the traditional world to make sure that is the case. Now, there's one thing that I want to mention, somewhat combining all of this, that just reminds me of some of the conversations that we've had. But I think it's fascinating. You were asking me before, like, how was it for us to go from traditional, like enjoying traditional art to this? So the reality is that my wife and I, again, have always been surrounded by my wife Desiree and I, by beautiful art. She's an interior designer and architect, and I'm a little bit biased, but I think she's incredibly good at it. And every time we come home, there's new changes to the home, design wise and artistic wise. And the reality is that we've had what some people might consider pretty decent art for a period of time in our home. And we're people that we like to host. We like to host all the time. We like to have our friends, our family over, and very, very few times anybody commented. Maybe less than a handful of times anybody commented on the art. Now the reality is that since we started collecting and living with digital art, because our home is pretty much a museum or a gallery where we have both analog and a lot of digital art through projections, through screens, through other means, through physical representations of digital works, but literally, no matter the background, no matter who it is, the first 15 minutes of anybody coming to the house is actually engaging with the art that we have there. I personally find that incredible, and it's just fascinating to see the interest, the level of interest that this is generating. And to me, the conclusion here is that NFTs or digital art, I don't like the word NFTs, but digital art is really democratizing. Because NFTs is too broad. It's like saying assets, but digital art has a way of really democratizing the engagement and the access to art, where I believe that everybody wants to live around beautiful creations and appreciates the thought process and the creativity behind this. But in some cases, most people, when they're not part of the ecosystem in the traditional art world, perhaps have a slightly barrier to entry, both education or it's just a more difficult industry to enter in that regard outside of the digital domain. So I think that's very positive.
I love that. And I think you're embodying so beautifully the kind of point of view that collectors have. This curiosity that Eduardo spoke about, where it's like, wow, I really want to figure out what's going on here, being out in front with a group of people looking at investing in the way that you're living with art and getting to know artists. So I wanted to mention that we put a link in the chat to a really cool Wired UK profile on Pablo. We could ask you so many more questions, but we just really appreciate your being here to share your work and your point of view. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. You're wonderful. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too.
Bye.
All right. Well, we have only covered a little bit of stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight a couple of things here, but I also just want to reflect back what really occurred to me listening to the people we were fortunate to talk to, and just forgive the extremely brief anecdote. One time in New York, I was walking to the grocery store, and unbeknownst to me, the Dalai Lama had been speaking at a theater nearby and was leaving the back. And I happened to be there at the moment that the entire crowd bowed. You kind of tear up. It's very moving. And the Dalai Lama got into a car. They blocked off Amsterdam Avenue, and he was off. And I always thought about it because he was so viscerally full of love that he made me included involuntarily cry, but also he was tracked by an SUV with the windows down with guys who clearly had guns in their laps, scanning the windows. And I think that what we're really encountering today, if I could kind of try to encapsulate, is on the one hand, like love and community and creativity and making, and also this passion and kind of fearlessness and embrace of newness, vulnerability of collecting. And then at the same time, we're in a structural world, some of it architected by the government, and sometimes regulation is a lagging indicator to how the world is developing and slow. So I think just to say that that really occurs to me as a structure of what we're looking at. So I hope what we've been able to do today is to think together about due diligence and how that functions around NFTs as art, to introduce some of the main compliance questions in proximity to how cool it is to think about the packaging of NFTs for sale, and then really to kind of hold space for those questions, especially the big ones like what NFTs are aesthetically, while we move into what we're really excited to do next week, which is especially go back to the artist stories and the democracy stories as we look at equity in art, systems of shared ownership, and the ways in which NFTs are moving cultural institutions and community governance. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Nora.
Thank you, Amy, and thanks for wrapping it and kind of bringing it all together. There's so much that was obviously shared and introduced, and that we are leaving our audience with. Hopefully, the minds that were blown have been kind of pieced back together, and everyone's digesting some of the really thoughtful ideas that were put forward and that we tried to explore. I will just say that our intention with this program is to really raise far more questions than to provide answers, and to really arm our audience with the tools to continue to ask more questions upon that. And so I think hearing from the people who are doing the work, who are selling NFTs and who are potentially advising around, the legality of information that is shared, to those who are collecting and who are pioneering this new path forward of how do you even donate this to an art museum. I think understanding all of the different complications of something like that is something that, I don't know, for me personally, I'm still kind of wrapping my head around. And so we hope that we have seeded some of those questions for our audience, and we very much look forward to bringing you all back next week for our final episode. That will be on November 10th, and it will focus, as Amy shared earlier, on equity and future states. And just a reminder, in case you just want to dig back in for more and more on NFTs, you can watch all of our past sessions right here on our YouTube channel. Again, please consider hitting subscribe if you haven't already, so that you don't miss the final episode in our series next week. You can also RSVP to that at mcadenver.org/NFT for an email or a text reminder. I want to say a special thank you to all of our participants tonight, all of our incredible guests, and of course, a huge thanks to Amy Whitaker for being the most dynamic collaborator. And finally, just a great thank you to Sotheby's for their support of this series. Thank you all so much for being here, and have a great rest of your evening.